Next week's the Hanukkah share.
Whoa. Now, Ed.
What?
Huh?
Are we gonna have soup cameo?
We are looking for a sponsor next week.
How much does that cost?
$100.
Whoa.
They're expensive. They're very special soup cameo.
They are.
My question is,
Should sit on the bottom of my stomach forever.
The week of Hanukkah, I'm not sure. I don't think so, but probably next week will be a Hanukkah share. So tune in.
So this restaurant we went to.
well, it's a very special day in the world, you know, where everybody converges
Delicious.
on a Sunday.
Yeah, it's delicious.
You have to have lots of.
So, you know,
You should always converge with.
You should have a chef.
Ed, sponsorship.
Tremendous
went up to
confusion for them, you know?
You should have a chef that's making fresh lots.
but don't worry, they're not going to go to work on Monday.
No.
You're bringing those from Eretz Yisroel.
What?
No one works anyway. You
have a chef making fresh
That's
lots.
the point of this. For those that do.
No, even those that do.
Your wife available?
December 15th on to the end of the year.
Huh?
Come back
I
January.
don't know about that.
It's an amazing thing. It's really, you know,
But she's
it's a
not
holiday. It's a religious holiday.
Okay, are we ready to roll?
The Monday.
Lots to do.
For federal.
We just need a kosher pad and a little burner.
I have no point
There, I think there's a corner of each, should be.
Then after we took care of business.
Yeah.
then that's what-
Okay, good morning. I'd like to thank everybody for coming this morning. Today's share is a special share. It's a share on the personality of Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, past Posky Ador. I think in our list, Kanan Har, this is already our 13th halachic personality that we'd like to give a halachic appreciation of. First one of this year's series. And the subtitle for Rabbi Elyashiv is The Unique Gadol of Eretz Yisroel. And we'd like today's share try to give a little bit of an explanation of his uniqueness. Obviously, anytime you speak about a Gadol, a posek like Rabbi Elyashiv, it's definitely very, very hard to do justice, especially in a few minutes. But Be'ez Hashem, we will try. Personally, Rabbi Elyashiv was somebody that, you know, I had the schus of seeing many shaylas, went to him, was around. We knew of Rabbi Elyashiv, people around me knew of Rabbi Elyashiv, and there's a lot to say. Now, Rabbi Elyashiv, this is undisputable, he was a giant. He was a giant not just in terms of the fact he was over 6 feet tall, and he gave off a very imposing impression. But at the same time, Rabbi Elyashiv was a giant, absolute giant in halacha. There just was an article the other day about David Feinstein's Etzal. Recently just was his second year site. And there was something that David Feinstein couldn't, you know, he asked the Shaila, and David Feinstein said, there's no Gemara, there's no Shulchan Aruch. I do not know any Makar for the Shaila. So what should we do? He says, go ask Rabbi Elyashiv. So the Talmud asked, do you think Rabbi Elyashiv is going to find the Gemara? Do you think he's going to find the Shulchan Aruch? So David Feinstein answered back, probably not. So why should we go to Rabbi Elyashiv? Because he's a real gadol. He'll get siyata d'shmaya. David Feinstein had the utmost respect for Rabbi Elyashiv. It went the other way too. Rabbi Elyashiv had tremendous respect. But David Feinstein had a shelf in his base medrash of just for Rabbi Elyashiv's svarim. He held them in quite high regard. He even also personally paid for some of Rabbi Elyashiv's svarim. He donated to them. Very, very, very much machshev who Rabbi Elyashiv was. Now, I would like to give a brief, or have a brief, it could be biography of Rabbi Elyashiv, followed by 3 points which I think Rabbi Elyashiv stood out. Rabbi Elyashiv is quite unique. One other disclaimer. Just this past week, I'll leave out the name, but I was with a famous Jewish writer, And I was talking really first to him about another gadol, but he brought up, and it was already in my head last week, I'm going to give a share in Elyashiv. He said, I was very close to Elyashiv. And I thought about the idea of writing a biography on him. But you know what? When I thought more about it, I realized it's impossible to write a biography on him. Because he just learned. What are you going to say? He learned and learned and learned. He was a person that we'll talk about, but not the easiest person to understand. And, okay, Be'ez Hashem, we'll try our best to go through it. Elyashiv was born in 1910 in Lithuania. His father, Rav Ram, was known as the Homler Rav. And one particular position which he had, which we'll soon see Rabbi Elyashiv took over, he was a Rav of a shul called Tiferes Bachrim, which in Europe functioned a very important purpose. It was a yeshiva, it was a shul type setting for people who were not in yeshiva. And it's something quite amazing. They had this in Europe back then. Rabbi Elyashiv ran one in Eretz Yisroel. It's something very much needed today, and not so popular. There are programs here and there, but to really have a shul dedicated like that, Tiferes Bachrim, there was nothing like it. Rabbi Elyashiv's grandfather, Shlomo Elyashiv, actually quite well known in the Kabbalah circles for writing a sefer called the Lashem. Huge tzaddik, who was also with them in Europe, Russia, and when he came to Eretz Yisrael, towards the beginning of the 20th century, huge contingent came to greet him as the Lashem's fame as a big tzaddik, big makubal, preceded him to Eretz Yisrael. There's an amazing story. Elyashiv really lived his life as an only child. There was a sister that was born years earlier, but she was niftaris, as we all know. You go back generations, the health, the poverty, all contributed that there are many children who didn't live out their childhood years. Rabbi Elyashiv's parents, after the death of that young daughter, didn't have a child for 17 years. And that was who really wanted to have a child. The story takes place that, from your grandmothers, great-grandmothers, of how they used to do laundry in the olden days. They had to go and have those washboards and soak the shirt, soak the item in the washboard, and literally drag it. And the process of doing laundry is a reason why women didn't work outside of the home. It was 24/7. The amount of work it took to launder clothes was a big undertaking. And one day, Rabbi Elyashiv's mother hung up her laundry. This is a famous story. Hung up her laundry in her courtyard where she lived, and some other Jewish woman, was probably in a bad mood that day and was all upset that the laundry was hanging in her path. And she took the laundry and threw it to the floor, threw it to the mud. Elyashiv's mother saw this. The story takes it for granted that she didn't fight back right then and there, attack her. She really wanted to say something when her husband came home that night about what happened. She held back. It seems the story was that later that night, the woman who did it came running to her, that my child is sick. I'm sure it's because I did something against you. And Elsh's mother gave a bracha, and the child should be okay. But the child did survive. But not long after that, Rebbe Elyashiv gave birth to a child of Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. The story is told at one time in the cab. Someone was driving Rebbe Elyashiv, and when they told the story in this, Rebbe Elyashiv refused to answer about it. That was the type of person he was. He didn't talk about himself. But an amazing story of Tikkun Amidah, right? It's definitely believable that could be the tremendous bracha that produces a child who literally lit up the world with his Torah. It's interesting. Rabbi Elyashiv, the fact that he grew up in Litva, Russia, he had a chance himself. His father learned by the Chafetz Chaim, and as a young child, 4 or 5, he went to the Chafetz Chaim his father took him to the Chafetz Chaim for a bracha, and the Chafetz Chaim said that his bracha was, may he be like his 2 grandfathers. One grandfather, Lul Shem, the other grandfather, also a chashav, very chashav yid, and seemingly that bracha was quite mekuyim. People used to come to Rabbi Elyashiv sometimes for brachas. He would push them off. The Chafetz Chaim knew how to give brachas. He knew well. Me, I don't know. The Elyashiv family moved back to Eretz Yisroel when he was a child. Again, he was born in 1910, I believe, before his 10th birthday. Around then, they already were back in Eretz Yisrael. They're talking about Eretz Yisrael in the early 1920s. Good 20 years, over 20 years before the founding of the State of Israel. And Rabbi Elyashiv, and we'll talk about this aspect, he learned for a little bit in a local yeshiva called Torah's Chaim. Right? Nice roots to have. But Yeshiva Torah's Chaim in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Elyashiv learned for a little bit. But for the most part, Rabbi Elyashiv's main rebbe was his father, who was mentioned was a huge Talmid Chacham. And he became a very big masmid. And as we'll soon explain, he spent most of his life not in yeshiva, learning with some chavrusas, but for the most part, learning by himself. Very, very, very unique. And we'll go on this soon. In 1929, at the age of 19, he was pushed and sought after to get married. In fact, the person pushing it was no other than Rav Kook. Famous Rav Kook, first chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. No, it wasn't his own daughter. But the famous Rabbi Aryeh Levine, a tzaddik in our times, had a daughter and very, very much was machshavah. I'll tell you this as an aside. His daughter had a bubbly personality, and anyone who knew had the schus to know Rebbe Kanievsky, who was Rabbi Elyashiv's daughter. Rabbi Elyashiv's daughter took after her mother. A very, very outgoing, bubbly personality. And she was a little nervous about marrying, about a shidduch with this super masmid, Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. So her father said 2 things. First of all, I'm going to take care of all the parnasa, it's all on me. Second, he's a masmid, he's going to be learning all the time. So I'm going to come visit you every day, spend time with you. Help out with the kids, whatever's needed. And tzaddik in our times. That's what happened. The shidduch went through. In fact, Rabbi Elyashiv, Rav Kook was Masader Kedushin at that wedding. The wedding took place on Friday afternoon in Yerushalayim. Classic. In those days, they had no money. Yeah. The Shabbos Suda doubled as the wedding Suda. Yeah. And they got married. And, they lived in Yerushalayim there. Not so simple. After a certain while, they moved, I think, in with his parents. This is how people did in the olden days. Fast forward, and Rabbi Elyashiv just sat and learned. Fast forward a certain amount of time, Rabbi Elyashiv actually got smicha from the head of the Edah Charedis, with Zelig Ruvain Bengis, very famous for Bengis, who was the head of the Edah Charedis, gave Rabbi Elyashiv at a young age a very, very powerful smicha. So he got smicha from the Edah Charedis, yet at the same time, he was very close to Rav Kook. Not just Rav Kook, but also Rav Herzog, who was also instrumental in the early years of Eretz Yisrael. And first he became the Rav after his father's passing. He took over his father's shul, this Tiferes Bachrim, which again was a shul for people not in yeshiva. And his father would give daily shiurim and Gemara to these people. And when his father was nifter, Rabbi Elyashiv used to give what started as a very simple Gemara share to these balabatim every single night. I think he didn't miss a night. I think even Motzi Yom Kippur, Motzi Tisha B'Av, Rabbi Elyashiv gave a share 365 days of the of the secular calendar. The entire year, Rabbi Elyashiv gave share to these Balabatim in the shul. A little while after that, Rav Herzog drafted him to join the Rabbanut, later becoming a dayan in the Beis Medrash in the Bezdin Hagadol. And I found there were notes that even Rabbi Elyashiv, and some things even Rabbi Shlomo Zalman was around also, when they were in their 30s, they were really paskening all the big shilos in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Herzog would turn to them to be the ones to pasken at the young in their 30s. They were paskening the big shilos in Eretz Yisrael. And the book, I found one biography tells that Rav Herzog would not give a personal smicha to any person who would come for a faher unless he first went to Rabbi Elyashiv. That's how he viewed it, that Rabbi Elyashiv was the address. My dear friend David Kalani told me a story about someone from his family, famous Rav Shalom Gold. He was a Rav for many, many years in Har Nov. So he was an American bacher who left Eretz Yisrael, learning in Eretz Yisrael. He tried to get smicha from Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog said, no, go to Rabbi Elyashiv. So he was fahered by Rabbi Elyashiv. Rabbi Elyashiv gave used to give the response in a closed envelope. And he went to him, okay? He didn't look. Rabbi Elyashiv served in the Rabbanut, in the Bezdin Hagadol for 22 years. Then he retired in 1972. And from 1972 to 2012, when he was nifter, past the last 40 years of his life, Rabbi Elyashiv just sat and learned, and he was a bacher, and we'll get to that. He became the Posek Ador, the Gadol Ador, and quite amazing. 9 years, one story I must say, 9 years before he was nifter, he had a major, major health scare. And the doctors basically in Eretz Yisrael thought they had nothing they could do, it's over. This week he went sick on a Friday. They sent shilos on that Shabbos. You know, the family, now who's Rabbi Elyashiv's family? Knai Nahara. You know, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was one of his son-in-laws. He has another son-in-law who's a big, big Rav Posek, Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein from Bnei Brak. The whole family is tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. So the Mesupik, what to do regarding his health, they sent shilos to Reb Chaim on Shabbos, what to do. Reb Chaim guided them for Shabbos in Paskund. He Baruch Hashem survived. American Askanim got involved in the situation with Rabbi Elyashiv's health, because at that point, this is going back 2003, Rav Shach was already nifter. Post Rav Shach being nifter, Rabbi Elyashiv was accepted as the Gadol Ador, hands down, and you had a very dangerous situation. You know, you had the Gadol Ador who was accepted as a Gadol Ador both in America and in Eretz Yisrael. Hands down. Rabbi Elyashiv was the Gadol Ador.
What was his health?
And you could go through some very, very delicate situation. I'm not sure. I don't know if doctors there, but it's in the book. The Askanim from America found a surgeon. Part of the issue was he needed an operation, but if you put him out, the chances are that he wouldn't get out. He wouldn't come out of it. He couldn't take the anesthesia, and it was a health complication on top of health complications. And they found, the Americans found a doctor in America that was an expert in this and be able to perform the surgery without anesthesia. They flew him private jet. It was a doctor from St. Louis. They flew him, I believe it was a sacrilege. One of my kids was in St. Louis this summer. They told me they heard about the doctor who saved Rabbi Elyashiv's life. They flew him, performed the surgery. It saved Rabbi Elyashiv's life. Rabbi Elyashiv lived another 9 years. And until the age of 100, This will segue into the first area. Rebbe Elyashiv was most known, and what's so unique was his absolute hasmada and his very unique derech halimud. Until he was 100 years old, right? That story happened 9 years before he was nifter. How old was Rebbe Elyashiv? He was 93. Until he was 100 years old, he got up at 2:30 a.m. every morning to learn. Went straight. He slept for a few hours and learned straight from 2:30 in the morning all day. Rebbe Elyashiv used to learn in the Beis Medrash called Ohel Sarah. You can actually still see it. It's there in Neish Arim. Rebbe Elyashiv was one of the only people who had a key to that was given a key to this Beis Medrash. He would go into the Beis Medrash, lock the door, and just sit and learn all day. He would come out after Shachris. He would do this. He would come out for Mincha, eat something. And later in life, he had certain times where there was Kabbalah's Kal, people could see him, ask Shilas and this, but for the most part, he was locked up the entire day, just sitting and learning. And the amazing thing was he'd be sitting and learning by himself. The way he got used to this, it's very, very hard. This is not something which could be accomplished. When people asked Rebbe Elyashiv about his tremendous hasmada, he would discourage them. He would say, it almost killed me. He was able to handle it, but it wasn't the type of thing which could be mimicked, could be copied. Rebbe Elyashiv, there's stories, people knew this. Somebody had a very important child. Rebbe Elyashiv said, okay, you can come to me in Old Sarah, this secret hideout, and you can knock on the window, and I'll come and open the door. And this person came, and he said, he stood by the window, but you were learning with Chavrusa, I didn't want to disturb. Someone else wasn't there. There was nobody else there. Rebbe Elyashiv used to learn by talking to himself. He would literally talk out one opinion, talk out the other opinion. He would fight with himself. He was literally able to hear two sides of an argument and go through the whole interaction, which mere mortals like us need someone else to stimulate us. He was able to stimulate himself and have these conversations and debates with himself, which is obviously extremely unique. The fact that he was a tremendous masman made it that his psakim, he was constantly relearning the Gemaras. There was nothing that was superficial. It was always something, every sugya he was always totally into, because he was always learning, always chazering. He said of himself that he spent most of the time, he had zmanim and he had bein zmanim. It's funny, he never really learned in yeshiva, but he kept what you call a yeshiva schedule. That during the zman, he would do the classic svarim, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, Shulchan Aruch, Rambams, Nosei Kelim, Rishonim. In his quote-unquote bein zmanim, he would allow himself to use, he still learned bein zmanim, but he learned more, Kishmak al-Lamdur, he did a Mishnah al-Melachs, these like long pilples on the Rambam. His son-in-law, Biscuit Zoberstein, said that was his bein zmanim. Just changing up, the topics he was learning. There's an amazing story. There was a Yid who grew up in Yerushalayim, early 20th century. Eventually he immigrated to America, became successful. So he was in his 80s, this Yid. So he went back for a tour of the old Stadt. And I assume the story happened probably in the 1980s, 1990s. He went around and he was asking the locals. He says, I remember when I was a kid, there was a bacher who locked himself up in the old Sarah, in his shul. Anyone know whatever happened to him? So the guy got the shock of his life when they told him, he's still there. Right? 80 years later, that bacher is still there. And his name is Rebbe Elyashiv. And he is accepted. For many, many years,
Thank God he's alive. Part of the furniture.
for many years, you know, Rabbi Elyashiv tried to keep himself, you know, quiet. And, you know, and you know, there were times when he became very popular. People were constantly going to him. You know, there's a tkufa that I saw a story. This Rabbi Morgenstern said that Rabbi Elyashiv was too much. He told him, "Okay, I'm going to hide out in Olsar. You know, don't tell anybody." But he had very strong goals for himself. I'll tell two stories on that. You know, and this is also a balance of halacha and minhagim. We know the minhag is to stay up Shavuos night. I remember years ago hearing this. Rabbi Elyashiv did not stay up all night on Shavuos night. He had a regiment. He woke up every morning at 2:30 in the morning. He went to bed, whatever time he went to bed. Not too early. He went to bed. He woke up at 2:30 and learned. He kept that even on Shavuos night. Because he felt, granted there was a minhag to do this, but in general, his limud Torah, he'll get more limud Torah if he did it the other way. And limud Torah is a deraisa. And that's a greater means of honoring Shavuos by doing it that way. Rabbi Elyashiv, he was Mechurin. You know, one of his daughters married Rav Shlomo Zalman's son, Yisroel Orbach, who today is the biggest poskim in Eretz Yisroel, is a son-in-law, a son of Rav Shlomo Zalman, and a son-in-law of Rabbi Elyashiv. They were the two biggest poskim in Eretz Yisrael in their times. At the chasna, Rav Shlomo Zalman sees that Rabbi Elyashiv is getting up to leave. He's like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "I have a schedule. I have to be up tomorrow morning, 2:30 in the morning." So he left. I don't know exactly when, after the first dance, after the main, I'm not sure how much he ate. But even the night of his daughter's chasana, you know, he was a very regimented person. He had a schedule. He wished Mazel Tov to his Mechurin, Shlomo Zalman. Shlomo Zalman himself was a big masmid, a big posek. But Rabbi Elyashiv was just a different level of asmada, which Memela affected the psakim that he had, were psakim that were constantly rehashed, constantly with lots of depth. It was never just memory. He was always learning. He was always up to the question you're asking. He was always right there. At the same time, despite the fact that he was very removed, locked up from everybody else, he understood people very well. He understood situations. He explained to him things. One of his closest, in my days, there were two Gabayim, two people extremely close to Rabbi Elyashiv. If you wanted to get into Rabbi Elyashiv, you had to ask them. One was this Yosef Efrati. He was an Israeli. The other one was David Morgenstern. He was an American. Now, I don't know the whole story of Rabbi Morgenstern. I tried to get parts of it. I asked people. David Morgenstern learned at MIT. Brilliant Jewish mind. I assume somewhere along the line, he dumped MIT and he's the big Rav in the Ramot today. And whatever he was originally pursuing, you know, he switched careers. And very, very much so with medical shilos, he presented to Rabbi Elyashiv. He would look up a lot of the situations. You know, just last night I came across the fascinating medical shilos with David Morgenstern. And medical is a broad term. Medical psychology and all forms of disorders. Right? Morgenstern is quite a capable person, and he discussed many of these shilos with Rabbi Elyashiv. At the same time, so Rabbi Elyashiv got all the information he needed for all these types of shilos, and he might have been literally locked up in a base medrash in the middle of Nei Sharon, but he understood how the world worked. I saw that the Israelis asked him shilos, you know, the army had shilos about where to put menorahs, you know, in encampments. Is a tank considered a dira? Where do you put the menorah by a tank? Was a shiloh that was posed to Rabbi Elyashiv. right? The open part, the window is on top of a tank. There's an amazing story of also a tricky shaila of a woman who was getting married who was vioris. And obviously part and parcel, when you write up a ksuba, there are halakhic issues involved. If she was married before, or even in this case, she wasn't married, but she wasn't from before, and no, she's not the same as a regular Jewish girl getting married. So, a very delicate balance how to handle it. How to handle the ksubas, halakhic nafkaminas. So, Elyashiv answered with the story. There once was a Eretz in Europe, a local government head, and he wanted, he was in charge of the Jewish community, so he decided he's going to pick the Rav was Nifter, who's going to be the next Rav in this community. This local sheikh is going to pick. I'm going to pick the next Rav. So there were a couple of candidates. Okay, he found people, the Jewish community, to put up some candidates, and they had two candidates. What does the Pirates do to go and test these? So he goes and opens up a siddur, asks them each to read. The first Rav he opened the siddur to Ashrei. The Rav Mamish reads it, as I say, as a mizmar, right through it. The next Rav, he opens up the siddur, and magically that one was up to Yotzros. The poor Rav read it very gently, delicately, but definitely not with the smoothness as the first Rav. Well, the pirates didn't know any better, so he picked the first guy as a Rav. The townspeople came. I could check up who the story was, but the big go. It might have been Reb Chaim Ozer. I went to Reb Chaim Ozer. The person who won the Prabha from the Pirates is Prabha, was the less qualified of the two Rabbanim. What should we do? They told the story to Reb Chaim Ozer. Chaim says, no, you got the right Rav. He says, it's a kasha on the second Rav. Why did he read Yotzros? He too should have just said Ashrei.
Right.
If the guy doesn't know what it says, you just read Ashrei. Rabbi Elyashiv said, this is the chap of what you should do with the ksuba. The ksuba is going to say she's not a basula. That's what halakhically has to be written in the ksuba. But how the Rav will get up there who could read an Ashrei, who could read a ksuba by heart, and will gloss over those things that's written in the ksuba. You can say whatever you want when you get up there.
Because no one's paying attention anyway.
Right? Brilliant chap. That was Rabbi Elyashiv. Rabbi Elyashiv dealt with shilas, and unfortunately some of these shilas weren't necessarily dealt with the same degree. In the earlier generations, Rabbi Elyashiv basically picked up. Anything that was written by Rav Moshe, Rabbi Elyashiv was tremendously machshav. But there are many shilas since Rav Moshe was nifter in the mid '80s that came to the Jewish world. Major issues of child abuse. Rabbi Elyashiv had to paskin on. If you open up this is right now the most popular edition of the Mishnah Berurah. Dirshu's Mishnah Berurah has, as we all know, besides the Mishnah Berurah on one side of the page, they have a collection of modern day psukim on the other side. You can't turn a page in this sefer without coming across Rabbi Elyashiv psukim. This is, I would dare say, he's probably the most quoted person in these Mishnah Berurahs, because Rabbi Elyashiv had psukim everywhere and anywhere, and he played an important role in furthering halachic responsa post Rav Moshe. A second aspect, I spent a lot of time, I'll run through these other two, but a second aspect, just understanding where he was, the fact of Rabbi Elyashiv from Pashut Pshat was the early 50s. So we're talking about the state was founded in in less than 5 years before that, Rabbi Elyashiv was involved in the running of the Bezdins in Eretz Yisroel, affecting all aspects of marriage, divorce, death, all major things. Rabbi Elyashiv was involved in the founding of the state. And he wasn't the only Chashav Rav. There were other, Bitzal Zolti, later became chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, so Rabbi Eliezer Goldschmidt, he was very close with. But Rabbi Elyashiv was one of the big Rabbanim, part of the Rabbanut, part of the Bezdin Haggadah, who was pasking the Shilas in probably the most important formative years of the modern state of Israel, from 1950 to 1972. For 22 years, Rabbi Elyashiv was there, and there's no doubtedly that, unfortunately, you don't know how many things switched since then, but he was very, very involved in laying the groundwork, which is so important for halachic Eretz Yisrael. It came to a close, unfortunately, when one of the famous, there were always issues, there were the Kanayim that attacked Rabbi Elyashiv for being part of such a thing, and years later, Rabbi Elyashiv became the recognized posuk of the door. There always were Kanayim attacking Rabbi Elyashiv, that he had shaykhs to the Rabbanut, but anyone who was in the know, who knew who Rabbi Elyashiv was, you're messing with the wrong person. In 1972, he resigned from being part of the Rabbanut, being part of the Bezdin Haggadah. That was all the infamous Mamzerim Shaila, which Rabbi Elyashiv and all the Gedolim Paskin. Fortunately, there was a situation of Mamzeris in Eretz Yisrael, and then eventually became the chief rabbi. Gorin permitted it.
Yeah.
And that was the line in the sand. That was the red line. Rabbi Elyashiv said no more, and he retired. He actually got a pension, retired from the Rabbanut, and just became his own man. And for the most part, a pretty quiet citizen. Most, people knew if you want to ask Shilas and Halacha, you could go to Rabbi Elyashiv. Or Rav Shlomo Zalman was alive then too. Rav Shlomo Zalman was an easier personality to get to. He was a very warm person. Rabbi Elyashiv was this quiet masmid, and he had years of I would say relative peace. In yeshiva, Chavetz Chaim, my rebbeim were very close to Rabbi Elyashiv, and a lot of times we had shilas, it was sent to him. There's even a great Maisa when the yeshiva moved to its current building in Yerushalayim, in Sanhedrin Morchevet. So they had a few shilas about mezuzahs. So they called Rabbi Elyashiv, reached out to Rabbi Elyashiv. Rabbi Elyashiv was very close to the rebbeim. He said, I'll come by. He literally came to the yeshiva and went around door for door going through the shilas. There's actually one bacher in yeshiva at that time. Today, he himself is a big posek. Actually did Shemesh by Rabbi Elyashiv. That one particular day, he was sick. So it was like 11:30 in the morning Seder. Rabbi Elyashiv's going around the dorm, checking out all the mezuzahs, and this guy comes out in his bathroom to go to the bathroom.
Yeah,
he said he forever was like mortified that, in the moment. He was sick. All you do. But one last area which I think has to be talked about, and I met with a posek yesterday, we were discussing this topic, and this I have on your sheets. I was talking so much, there are quite a few halachas I left out, I put down, we'll contrast, we'll see. Rabbi Elyashiv probably had, in modern times, the most piskei halacha of his, full svarim or quoted. Maybe his son-in-law by now, Chaim Kanievsky, could be overwrote him. Rabbi Elyashiv was the first of the modern poskim in our era that there just a plethora, so many svarim were published with Rabbi Elyashiv's psakim. And that's very good, but at the same time very bad. On the side over here, there was a kuntris that I got. I used to go to, when I was there as Yisroel. I actually went to a couple times to Rabbi Yashiv's Yurtzeit Sudas. The Talmidim gave out that unfortunately there's a lot of psakim out there which are debatable. Did Rabbi Elyashiv say, not say that he was he might have said it to this person for that particular case, but you can't extrapolate to other cases. I'll show you over here, for example, there's a Sefer Shal Tshuvas Divrei Chachamim, which are based, I think, of psakim that Rabbi Elyashiv gave probably in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. There it says, common shiloh coming up to Hanukkah. Do you put a menorah outside your house? Right? Halacha says really the best place to put a menorah is outside your door. If you look in Eretz Yisroel, that's what they put. They put these little boxes.
Yeah.
They put the menorah outside. Do you do that in America? There are people, some in our neighborhood, you'll see in New York people who do this. So I saw in two different svarim for quoting Rabbi Elyashiv, two different answers. In this particular sefer, he says, no, the minhag in Eretz Yisrael in America is not to do it. You don't do it. In the sefer Ashrei Ish, which was published within the last 10, 15 years, there it says, Rabbi Elyashiv says, yeah, if you could do it, you should do it. You could, not likuva. But that's a different psak. According to this psak, I wouldn't think twice about it. According to that one, maybe yes, maybe no. So which one do Rabbi Elyashiv say? It could be both. It could be neither. And there are many psakim like this. It might be true that he's quoted on every single page inside a Dir Shema Shabura, but you have to look up the source. You have to know who wrote that sefer, how trustworthy it is, what exactly that psak is. Very not so simple. So although there are tons of svarim from Rabbi Elyashiv, it's not so clear. For the most part, he didn't write. There are some, there's Kovitz Tshuvos. I have on top of the pages, the Tshuvos, some of them are actually from when he was on the Bezdin in Rabbanut. Years earlier, he wrote Tshuvos. And there's some Ksav Yads that the family has. But it's very kedai, a person hears a psak from Elyashiv, to always ask, what's the source of that? Where is it from? What sefer, who wrote it? Is that something he wrote? He wrote, he didn't write so much. What I left out, one very interesting other topic, besides Rabbi Elyashiv's psakim, they have come out in every Masechta in Shas, those shirim that he gave to the Baal Batim, which years later, it wasn't just Baal Batim going to the shirim. I was also to be there. There are many Chashva Talmidei Chacham used to come there daily to those shirim, especially in the later years. And it was a fascinating shir because you could speak up. You could ask questions in the middle of the shir. He would just answer back.
Where was it given?
It was given in that shul from his father, the Ferris Bachrim. In the later years, Elyashiv was weaker. It was a caravan basically right outside his house. Right? And after he was nifted, that caravan was still there. I was there in Eretz Yisrael this past year. I went. The caravan's not there anymore. We're hearing they took it to remote. It's movable.
Caravan is a mobile home.
Yeah, the caravan's not there anymore. But good memories. But I was by Tiferes Bachram too. I remember. I heard those shirim. So Elyashiv wasn't just a baki in the classic Shulchan Aruch, Mefarshim, and this. He was a baki in all the achronim on a page of Gemara. Achronim that talk about a page of Gemara. Like for example, one of these tshuvas, he quotes a makneh. I have on top of the page. That's what Elyashiv himself quoted. A makneh is a chashva achron written on the Gemara, but he was able to incorporate all these things into his psak. That's part of his hasmada, and as we said, his hasmada was something that having a person like him in the cornerstone of the setting up the halacha, the state of Eretz Yisrael, was so essential. And there's so many svarim from Elyashiv, but at the same time, we have to balance and know where they came from, how reliable it is. Well, and it's just one story. There was a case of a Jewish woman from Europe who unfortunately went off the derech and married the Shegets, moved to Switzerland, and unfortunately that relationship didn't last. Fortunately, that relationship didn't last, but seemingly a lost soul, and randomly she was nifteris young. Her father, went to the local Chaver Kedisha, and they wouldn't want to bury her. She went off the derech. She married a Gentile. They weren't ready to bury her, and the father knew that it could be a fight. It's not easy to do this. How are you going to override the Chaver Kedisha? So someone must have said, there's one person you can call Rabbi Elyashiv. He called Rabbi Elyashiv, and Rabbi Elyashiv thought about it, And he asked, she was Nifteris literally right after Yom Kippur. He asked to find out, where was she the last day of Yom Kippur, the last days of her life? Where was she? They found out that she went to shul for 30 minutes. She came by for 30 minutes. Shul. Rabbi Elyashiv gave instructions, please tell the Chaver Kadisha they could bury her in the Jewish cemetery. Elyashiv might have been locked up in that little shul, all Sarah, while he understood the world, he understood people, he understood where halacha, where you could bend and where you can't bend. And the world was a better place because they had somebody like him. And every time we hear a psak from Elyashiv, hopefully after a little bit of understanding him today, we'll have a great appreciation for who that true giant was. Thank you very much. Bez Hashem, next week we'll be able to share Yoni Chanukah. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Okay.
All the good when you talk.
Okay, thank you very much.
When is Hanukkah?
Huh?
When is Hanukkah?
Sunday night.
So from Erev Pesach, now supposed to have matzah, some say from Purim.
You can have some-
So then you'll be used to this.
I noticed that you used to bring home the donut to Meredith, and now I notice the plate is empty.
But it's not.
We can't let we can't let any cameras.
Did she ever ask where the donut went?
She knows where the donut went.
And she doesn't care.
It's okay.
Good for you.
It's okay.
I was always wondering how I quit eating them, but I can't put it in front of me because I'll take it. It won't get home. You did it well for a long time.
I
That's
did.
Good.
I did.
I'm just glad to see
What can I say?
I'm glad to see you.
I regress. I have tremendous regression.
But now I see my morning for your Rav. Let's have Shabbos too. And see if we can figure out.
Probably could. I might have to sneak it.
He's very close to the line. We called the real Shabbat that Friday morning.
My only
He
question
also gave us very clear direction. He said, if you take with Joshua, you take your number, and you understand,
She'll know.
between lands and Shabbos, you're not allowed to move.
I guess.
She does.
All the secretaries of the terminals, everywhere you are. That's when you have to spend the Shabbos. That's why you can bring with grape juice. You have columns. If you're ready to do that, you get in the front.
Yeah,
could bring
Well, you can put it in a bottle.
No, this is
They don't want
20 something years ago.
All right, just have multiple separate bottles and then.
Well, in turn,
Not that side,
But
we go in the next cab on the way to the airport.
you off.
They're all these days, they're all back in New York.
They're awful,
Landed
those
like
places.
like
That was
3:30.
largely why
Shabbos
Jake
was
opened that one up.
by 4:30.
It's actually
They got us off the plane.
Rabbi
New York connections, so plane full of Jewish people.
Consortium.
And we get on this plane, there'll be no flights. It was Rosh Hashanah. There were no flights.
this is coming back,
Huh?
coming back.
Put it back to America.
But there you made it okay.
Yeah, well,
There you made it.
no,
What'd
the
you
flight
do?
was delayed, 10 hours.
Oh, so what happened with the grape juice and the
Oh,
coffee?
no.
That was going there.
You go coming to America.
Oh, that was coming.
You got it,
That's right, yeah.
Why
Really, I should say this.
would it be?
All right.
Why would it be?
You're welcome. Thank you for
Different answers.
Different answers on the exact same answer.
Correct.
You could be different generations, different pieces, different.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, but how are you supposed to know which one we should do now?
There's even, there are piecemeal, there are something that I've given to individuals where I've had the conversations with them. 15, 20 years ago, I said one thing, and now I'm telling you something.
Right. I think the shot is, the reason why it's such a problem with Moshe is because everything he said, it was the era that the Swarm were cheaper. People that are Swarm published daily. So that's why we're running into this problem. But Moshe fights for Moshe's own truths. And he was in control. But he also didn't write his own truths. And he wasn't in control. And people just jumping. You have the same thing with Chaim Kanievsky.
And so they're not as not keyed on the minutia of the
Josh, it was good you hit every single step, no? It's not sure.
Okay.
I say the story, I wish I spent more time.
These are the stories?
Huh?
These are the stories?
By the Giores.
The article had some, Mishpacha magazine, some, and some of my own.
I want to see this. I want to see it. I know, I'm just looking at the. I want
And by the Giores, by the Tsuda.
Yeah.
So there's a family I'm close with where the whole family converted by all their girls' chasumas. I purposely, most chasumas I space out because why would I want to pay attention? I don't care. By their chasumas, I'm like finding someone to schmooze with. I don't want to know what they say.
Yes.
I'm never going to be in the Saturn condition. There is literally no reason for me to focus on it now. If I want to learn it, I'll learn it later. But it's like, I had one. Oh, by the way, the shear a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Is this a reason not to pay attention by some classes?